call it the sweet spot, is curiosity.
Leadership for me is self-inquiry.
Because it's all about relationships.
We actually started from a place of we want to invest in this leadership population.
And I love the fact that on the bottom in the foundation is trust.
In my experience, the ones that are willing to be the most vulnerable, and those are the ones that make the biggest shift.
I see this as the chance for humanness to really step up.
All the data shows us that organizational values make zero, in fact, minus 0.2% negative impact on people's level of commitment and loyalty to their role and the business compared to their knowing their personal values, which can give you anywhere between, it used to be a 17 to 20% increase in commitment and loyalty to the business. Post-COVID, back to your earlier question, Mark, when people kind of had a chance to really reflect on who am I, what's going on, we found, listen to this, we found it jumped from 17% to 72% impact.
Wow.
So we had this quantum leap in impact, people going, wow, if I could really embody my own values through my work and still be in alignment to the business strategy, governance, the laws of the land, etc. Right now I'm cooking with gas.
So thinking about that, I know that it will be important for me to look back on my life and think about all the things that are outside of work. So I make sure I put the time into those. I have never found that I'm ever called on that. You know, I give enough to my job, I'm sure. And those people on the call that work at Assured Quality have worked for us will tell me if I'm wrong there or know me. But I think work gets its pound of flesh, but I do make time for other things. And I think that's really important. It also keeps, to your point, Mark, and your question, it gives perspective on things too, right? Because if you are wholly and totally only in the job, you lose perspective. And if you say you're purpose-led and your convictions there and you know what you're doing is great work, it can be, if that's all you've got, you can lose what it looks like. I think I'm a better leader at work because I have other stuff.
Because you're also a human being. You're not just beholden to the organization you're at. So really thinking about your own brand and your own personal purpose, that is probably the number one thing that helps me stay centered and keep momentum going, is that I'm super clear on my own personal purpose, not just my professional mission, if you will.
I just tried this new approach. I had never tried it before. A couple weeks back, we actually did a pseudo meditation, and I call it pseudo meditation because I'm not a meditation teacher, and so I was very clear. But what we spent time doing was, focused on our breathing, and then after about 10 minutes, we called it, and then we debriefed around when you get lost in thought. What were you thinking about, right? And I teed that up. It's like it's okay to get lost in thought. We do it, right? But what I wanted them to do was to pay attention to what the thought was, to really prime that sense of, okay, I'm having a thought about something, right? And then we did some work on dialogue. If you're familiar with dialogue, really, really great tool. Not allowed to solve the problem, which a lot of operators love to do. And so really just asking questions and digging in and embracing their curiosity, and then stopping, irregularly and saying, okay, so what's going on for you? How are you thinking about this? How are you thinking about this problem? What are you feeling? So really driving a sense of self-awareness, really shifting them and introducing in a kind of a modified way the whole concept of balcony and dance floor. right? And nurturing that ability to be in there and stepping out and seeing what's going on and observing not only what's happening, what other people are saying, but how are you thinking about it? And then getting really curious about what's going on for them. One of the metaphors that we use is an iceberg, right? And so part of the language becomes, where are you working? Are you working above the waterline? Are you working below the waterline? And that below the waterline is really uncovering mindsets, beliefs, assumptions, digging into emotions. Where is this coming from, et cetera? And so that simple image comes back over and over and over again of, where are you working? Are you just focused on the behavior, yours as well as theirs? Or are you taking that step back and digging in under the waterline, right? Because that's where the real work happens.
Leadership for me is self-inquiry. And if I'm kind of a little bit corny with that, what I basically mean is the only person you can possibly lead is yourself. And even to do that, you need to understand, when you refer to self, what are you referring to? So that's a really, really deep kind of self-inquiry. I think that leadership inside organizations often gets attributed to status or function or role or responsibility or mandate. And so a lot of that is system, process, and maybe even politics rather than leadership. So in anthropology, leadership only occurs in reference to leading other human beings, right? So it's not about leading a process. It's not about leading a business. It's about, when we talk about leadership, it's going literally almost reverse lensing and going, who is following the example you were setting of being you? And if people are following that because they feel that there's something meritorious about you or motivating about you or about meaningful about how you conduct yourself with others, and they kind of go, oh, kind of, I like what Corey's doing. I like the way she shows up. I like the language she uses. I like the presence she has with others. And so they gravitate to that. That in anthropology, that's leadership. So in other words, leadership is almost just mirroring back to, hey, have you considered, and it's not that you're doing it deliberately, you're actually doing it for yourself, but you're kind of reflecting back to others. There's this way of being human. What do you think? There's this way of being human. What does that say to you? What does that invite in you? What potential do you see in this example that I happen to be exhibiting? Not to impress you or to win favor or to create followship, but sort of in response to. So for me, yeah, leadership increasingly so is very much around self-inquiry, and only self can do that for self. It's, there's others that can support you and provide information and guidance and tips and experience, and you can absorb that. But ultimately, leadership for me is you only lead yourself.
The environment we're in is going to always have a lot of discomfort because no one knows the rules anymore, right? I mean, things have changed considerably. You do need to step into the unknown, and all of us do, because the change around us is unprecedented. And the amount of change we're seeing, change in the last century has been 20,000 years worth versus the century before, where you had 100 years of change in a century, which is what you'd expect, right? So the rate of change and the environment we're leading in, and all of us are trying to deal with, I think, does lend itself for this need to be courageous, need to lean into the new. And I think you've been talking about in these calls about AI, and I see so many leaders and CEs that ask me, well, how do we deal with this? Do we, tell people, well, we can't use this because there's so many dangers with it. And in my mind, and I guess some of my experience that I described is that you can't, it's like saying we're not going to get involved with the internet, right? It's like, this is the new, this is the new norm. So what we need to do is adapt and move forward and be courageous and not be scared to make a few mistakes. Just try and make those mistakes smaller, so take bite-sized or small steps forward. Just make sure you're going forward, but you can't put the brakes on right now.
One is around, it can't be about content when it comes to leadership development. Content is by nature a backward-looking thing. Something's been codified and created. So yesterday's solutions won't solve tomorrow's problems. So if we focus on content, we're almost behind the 8 ball from the beginning. So we sort of really wanted to move beyond content into something that was a lot more human and emergent. And the second one was which was very closely linked, they're all very closely linked, which is the importance of adaptive leadership. There's kind of a broad school. You can categorize challenges into adaptive challenges and technical challenges, or wicked problems and tame problems. Or some of you may be familiar with the Cynefin, which is kind of, we have complex and chaotic on one side and hard and simple on the other. They're all kind of saying the same thing. And by the time we talk about leadership, it really needs to be dealing with the adaptive side of things. There's lots of other work out there, skills training, experience that people build that really work on those technical problems. So we really wanted to focus on the adaptive side of things, helping build people's capacities to deal with a very, very fast changing world. Whether it was, and this is what we felt in 2009, not 2024, which it's just continued. And then the third one is that we do what we do. And there's this idea of the knowing doing gap. We know that we should do something, yet we behaviorally continuously do other things. So any leadership development really needs to be focused on experiential things that we do and then we reflect on, because that's what moves into the behavioral part of our brain that governs a lot of our actions and reactions. And so if we're going to take people out of work or even integrate with their work, we need to make whatever comes away from the time, the precious time that we have with them, very action orientated. Not so much, and the benefit isn't so much the actual action they take, it's the training and the programming of the behavioral part of their brains that is the benefit. So that the next time they face those situations, they're more likely to act in a more deliberate, helpful way.
I see this as the chance for humanness to really step up. Like the tech stuff is going to be accelerating. I'm all for actually, how can we accelerate some of the humanness, bringing out the best of us? By thinking ahead, it stretches you a little bit, and it means you'll be a little less surprised when things happen. So actually, I think that it's a really good skill set for resilience. We talk about kind of for growth mindset and resilience. If you're always pushing yourself to think out a little bit, even if you then kind of come back, it just means that as things flow out, you'll be, oh yeah, I had heard about that a few years ago, or oh yeah, it's not quite as unexpected. And so I think that's why I'm really passionate about getting people to think out there, because it just helps you brace for the moment a little bit better. I've actually now, because of that, started building into my presentations, grounding at the end of it to kind of get them back to, but we're in 2024. This is a reality of where you are now. You know that some of these things might be coming, so that's great. You're going to be less surprised. But what can you do tomorrow to move yourself to a bit of a better understanding? But yeah, let's bring it back. You're safe. There's no robots in your house. Unless you got a vacuum cleaner, you're good. Let's ground to this, and how we step forward.
Less focus on the money, more focus on the existing people that you have and tapping into their energy, because that naturally drives innovation, and that actually becomes a transformational lever. Doesn't mean you implement everything that they ask for, everything they bring forward, but that's a way that you can actually curate a way to have much deeper discussion. And I will tell you factually, I have seen engagement results in the organizations I've been with level up, because people are like, oh, I have more clarity. Oh, I'm being seen, I'm being heard. That's a sense of belonging. And that's, again, is something that you really cannot put a number on financially.
We have an open once a month course that anybody can sign on to come along. And we invariably have a wide range of leaders. We've had people that have been in their 50s and their 60s that have been leading for 30 odd years. And we might have somebody who's in their early 20s coming into their first chance at leadership. And so in theory, they're in different places. But by the time they've been out there with the horses, neither of them has any knowledge of the horses. They're both put back to being beginners. They're both in what we talk about as the learning pit, the uncomfortable place where you're learning something new. And sometimes something works and sometimes something doesn't. And we're back to trial and error and the most basic form of learning. And I think putting everybody in that same spot builds connections because they can see each other struggling and each other having little successes and having little failures. And suddenly everyone's on a level. So then when we come back into the house and we start talking about it in the facilitation and we start pulling it apart, people are really interested in the comparisons between what's worked for someone and what hasn't, what their experience was with their horse versus what my experience was with my horse. And so that's where we start getting the more experienced leaders may share some of their insights that they've got, but some of the younger leaders can also have real light bulb moments that get older leaders to think about things in a new way, maybe to remember back what it's like at the beginning of their journey.
When my team was set up, like we had never done this before in this way. There was no playbook, no precedence. I mean, we were using the data and intuition and experience we had to make decisions, but oftentimes we'd be like, is it this or that? And we would say, well, let's just go with this one. And if it doesn't work, we will learn from it. And that mindset throughout the experience as we were designing and planning for store directors was really critical. In fact, I told my team that we need to invite failure into this process because as we're piloting, if we don't learn something now with a smaller audience, it's going to be magnified when we get to scale. And that I'm making it sound easy, but it can be really tempting when you have a very highly visible program with a highly critical audience to want to control as much as you can and make sure everything goes right. But if that happens, then we probably weren't pushing the bounds of what we were trying to do enough.
Get the executive on board and have some really strong priming and signaling from them about how important this is. You know, this is not something that is a sideways sort of a compliance thing. Developing and growing as a person and as a human and increasing your capacities is essential for our survival as an organisation and for the delivery of our strategy. Those sorts of messaging coming through. And then when people start experimenting and doing those on-the-job actions in service of their work, not because we've designed them as designers, things that they actually need done, identify, this is the senior executive, identify some of those and highlight them and share them out to everyone else. The few times that we've done that effectively, it's had a really big impact because it's kind of like people are going, oh, wow, they noticed this hard work that I do, because it's often hard and vulnerable, and they're celebrating it. And everyone else who didn't get celebrated said, oh, okay, I'm in. It's called social proof. And the thing is, you can have on the side of a street, you can have 3 people standing up like this in a city staring up, and everyone walks past them and says, who are those nutters? You get 15 people standing on the side of a street looking up like this. Everyone stops and looks up and starts joining in. So how do you create that impact for leadership development? And that sort of top-down signaling can be very, very strong to create that social proof that it's a good thing to do. But then the middle out, by nature of leadership development, there's a big impact on the people that report to our participants, because they're doing actions and they're reflecting on them, and they're often doing things that have a large impact on those down. But what also happens is the one-up managers get impacted because they see and feel the impact of these different things that go through. And so that can kind of create that reverse cascade that you're talking about, Jamie. And, you know, in a perfect world, you're doing both. You're doing both.
My approach is to really engage with them and almost slip into coaching mode and having them identify that this is no longer working, right? And to see where their frustration is. And generally the way that we get there is we start talking about some of these organizational challenges that they're having. And then I'm stealing this question from somebody, and sorry, but I don't remember who it was. I asked them what their role is in that and what would they like to see differently? What would they like to see happen? And they'll frequently call out what the issue is that they've been dancing around, or the system that was broken, or that they've been wrestling with it for a while in their own head, and they haven't been able to come up with a new way of approaching it. And so when you start unleashing the potential of their folks to come at these things that were not working, or these systems that were broken or not working as effectively as they could before, they now start to get some critical mass around what the issue is. And another thing that I found really helpful, and I'm going to butcher the word for it, it's the Cynefin model, complexity, complicated, clear, and chaotic problems, and introducing that to give them some language so that they can start thinking about best practices and good enough practices, and how are we got to try things, and what's changing about the world that is making our old practices not work effectively anymore. So you give them some language so that they can kind of disassociate is not the right word, separate themselves from the problem. So this is the problem that we're wrestling with. It's not me, it's the problem. Maybe I'm not contributing to the solution, but you help them create that psychological distance.
It's all done out of an old farmhouse, roaring fires, great food, good old sort of country values. And I think one of the main things is for 2 days, the busyness of life, people can sort of just focus, get present, get rid of the digital element, focus on themselves, have a look back on how things are going. And sort of in terms of leadership, you got to become the best version of yourself before you can lead others effectively. So have a good look at yourself. And not only at work, we talk about all sorts, energy levels. Are we a 10 at work and a 2 at home? That's not good enough for families. The balance isn't right. So we talk about the overall effect, I suppose, on trying to be the best we can be.
Leadership's not just bad in the workplace. You come home and parenting's a form of leadership, or you're out in your community and you're working with a community sports group or another organization. There's quite often leadership elements. So, leadership can look different, but it's essentially the same hat, the same skills are required.
A really cool example came up from a psychology session that I was at earlier this week around, a company put in some AI tools in their contact center. And basically what it did is it made efficiency gains of like 15% or something. So the company was thrilled. And what it did was, after the call center contact call, it would summarize the call that the person had and put it into the system and put key points and all that sort of stuff that the person used to have to do. And so AI, boom, sorted out that, made a whole lot of efficiency gains. However, that was a really important psychological break for a person to reflect on the call, think about what had gone well, what it didn't, what they'd talked about, what were the key things, and have a bit of brain downtime to do that. Once they stripped that out, the impact of burnout on the call center was horrific, because they were going call without that flow. And so that's one of those human behavioral elements that's not talked about when people are putting technologies in. I'm begging people to get involved with your Copilot implementations, because it's largely a technology project, and the people departments get involved purely for what's the training rollout for this, or what's the comms about this. Whereas actually there's going to be some massive behavioral shifts that are going to come with Copilot.
We first started engaging and talking about how we wanted to design this program, I was pretty intentional in saying that we're not going to start from a place of gap. Like, this is what our leaders aren't doing. And so now we're going to focus on these skills to get them to do the things we want them to do. We actually started from a place of, we want to invest in this leadership population. Now, Target, again, has been very vocal and has a track record of investing in our frontline employees. And so we hold a belief that that's important. And so that certainly helps. And so when I talked about, we're going to start from a place of investment, we talked about ways that we could help, reimagine learning, help store directors feel a sense of belonging through connection with their peers. And if you start there, then inherently the impact of driving leadership performance follows that. And so it was a subtle shift, but I think a really important one, because then you start to make decisions through the lens of what is going to be best for the store director versus what is going to be best for us in learning and development, or what is, you of course need to be responsible, right, with your resources and your time and your energy. But when you have that frame is really felt by the end user, and the impact follows. We saw things like, extending far beyond, here's the skills I'm learning in this program, but around SD engagement. They reported feeling less stressed. They are having better conversations with their leader. They're having better conversations with their team. And all of that has a ripple effect